I think we have time for one more question. So, yes, you may ask the question.
Thank you. So I've lived in San Francisco for the last 5 years, and 3 of those years were spent in property management, residential, formerly homeless, city-funded property management.
Wow.
So kind of like the Henry you were talking about.
Yeah.
I managed the Hillsdale for a while, like a
Yeah.
block away on 6th Street.
Well, good for
So
you.
I'm very familiar
Yeah.
with that kind of stuff. It was a great experience. Moved on from that now, thank God, but it opened my eyes to a lot of the issues you're talking about. If I had to ask one question, I guess what I would, so from that experience and from living there, we live in Lower Nob Hill, and I walk through there all the time, and I see this this trend of, mental health, addiction, all that stuff, homelessness, right? But I know there's not a lot of facilities for mental health. I know a lot of those have been defunded a long time ago. And I see a lot of people that are in those buildings, in city-funded buildings, that need more care and just aren't getting it. And also the homelessness, like we talked about, income inequality, that kind of battle you see going on. I know like some of the techies and the homeless have gotten in some media wars over that. But where do you see that headed? Like, do you see any progress in that part of it, like as far as homelessness and getting people the treatment they need?
So let me ask you a question. So you're not doing what you're doing before. What made you move on from that? It must have been rewarding on some level, right?
Yeah, opportunity, and it was kind of depressing.
Yeah.
It takes a toll on you after a while. 3 years was long enough for me. It was a great experience. Looked really good on the resume too. I moved on to commercial property management.
I mean, in San Francisco right now, right? I mean, there was this whole effort to focus the citizenry on homelessness. All the media got together, and they published a number of studies and articles on homelessness. And unfortunately, people don't necessarily read the hard papers anymore. I don't know how much of it actually, was able to pierce the stratosphere. But the mayor has created a Department of Homelessness, which in a sense we've always had, but there hasn't been a department dedicated to that alone. He's brought it into someone that is new on the job. People are kind of saying he has the potential to be sort of this messiah who can cure homelessness. I mean, that's a big job, as you know. I mean, when people think of homelessness, they think about it as a homogeneous problem, like it's one group of people and it's one problem that's contributing to it. The reality is that it's so many, as I'm sure you've seen. I mean, they're just as diverse as any other group of people who have problems. Some people have lost their jobs. Some people have mental health problems. Some people are drug addicts. Some people have serious untreated mental illness. Some people are just living on the fringes. I saw the statistic recently that it's like, what did they say? Like 70% of homeless people once had full-time jobs or something like that. So that kind of destroys the idea that there's all these people out there who just have never worked. But the idea, that San Francisco has tried, with varying success, is the idea that you would provide housing first, and then you would provide services on site. The problem with that is that unless you really have intensive services that are going to, wake somebody up in the morning and basically stay with them throughout the day, which is called case management, you're not going to have, the level of intense services that most of the people need. And they try to put drug people together, mental health people together, but that creates its own problems too, right? Because you have, and most of these, they call them SROs, single residence occupancy, are located in the Tenderloin, which is like the worst place that you would want to be if you're trying to stay away, from drugs. We don't have a place, up in, Sonoma or somewhere where people can go, and relax by the beach. I think that though, that the answer has to be, that we have to allocate the resources that it's going to take to house people. I like the idea that they're using in Colorado of the small houses. that they give people these small houses, tiny houses, and they build them. I think they're like, and they build them for like $35,000 a piece. It probably costs triple that in San Francisco, but they are able to have a dignity of a house, and that they have, if you're an alcoholic, you can go to a center where you can use alcohol safely. You can go to an injection center. They're doing this in Canada. They're doing this in Seattle, and they are seeing, success. Now, as a taxpayer, do you want to be in the business of subsidizing, these kinds of places? I mean, that's a whole nother issue. But if they're going to be using on the street, and your kid playing at the playground is going to step on a hypodermic needle, maybe it is worth the cost of keeping that away. And they have found that there's been more success in keeping harm reduction, keeping people off of drugs and away from drugs by using this softer approach. Right now in San Francisco, we issue something like 40,000 citations a month on homeless people for illegal camping, for sitting and lying, and those citations never get paid. Those citations end up getting thrown out after a few years. I had an opportunity to meet with the housing czar from the federal government when he was here, and he said, I said, what would you do if you were mayor for a day in San Francisco? And he said, I would get rid of all the citations, because you're wasting all that money on citing people who can never pay these citations anyway. And then when they try to sign up for services, they have all these warrants. So that's exceedingly frustrating. I don't mean to bring everybody down here. But the answer, I think, is that we are going to have to coordinate the money that we spend. We spend $220 million a year in San Francisco on homeless services. Half of that goes into housing. So, I mean, that probably is a good use. The $110 million goes into services. And that's where people are often very critical. Now, you're talking about HIV services, you're talking about feeding people, supporting institutions like Glide. That's all good things. The problem is that there isn't coordination. You don't have a central system. So what that means is that you might have 25 users who are spending $1 million each a month. Those are high volume users. Those are people who are passed out on the sidewalk. They got to be taken to San Francisco General Hospital for 2 weeks. They're then put into a detox center. They get out and they're back on the street, on the sidewalk again. And so it's that same cycle, that's frustrating. The programs that have been successful are sending people home on a bus ticket, giving them a bus ticket home, permanent housing with real services, and thirdly, putting people in long-term, drug treatment programs where you're not just putting them there for 30 days or putting them on methadone, but that's very expensive. So are we prepared as a society to spend $1 billion, on that? I mean, one of the issues I was intimately involved with is pension reform, which is trying to get city employees to pay for their pensions, because we're now spending $1 billion on pensions for 50,000 city employees. And I thought when you're talking about cutting city services, that was wrong. And we should be contributing towards a pension. Well, I caught hell for like 2 years for trying to do that from the unions and everyone else, because they didn't want to see that kind of change. And I get that. But again, when we're talking about the priority in services, one of the reasons we don't have money to spend is because we're spending 1 out of every 7 tax dollars on paying pensions. And so if you retire from the police department after 20 years, and you're 50 years old, you could be even younger if you started younger, and your salary is $220,000 a year, you retire with 90% of that for the rest of your life. So you live to you're 95 years old, that's 45 years. You don't even get that kind of royalty in the music business for a hit song, But I mean, it's all about priorities and how we choose to spend our money. So they try to have a tech tax, right, and make the tech companies pay for more homeless services, and that didn't go through, right? Because you say, well, you're displacing everybody, and so you should have to pay for the homeless. Well, what's the logic in that, really? Yeah. I mean, it's like, okay, so you're in a particular business, and so that's why people are homeless, I mean, we can't have specialized taxes. I don't believe that on people just because, they happen to be successful. That sounds very Republican, but at the same time, we're supposed to have, somewhat of a fair tax code, and, and not to say the tax code doesn't need reforming, but, we can't simply say that the burden of solving homelessness is going to fall on one class of people.
Yeah, yeah. So the moral of the story is become a police officer in San Francisco.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. There's so many questions I know that everyone still has. Thankfully, Jeff will be here, I hope, through dinner, and please feel free to approach him.
And you know what? Thank you so much for inviting me.
Oh,
'cause
you're taking off?
No. But had I not met you at Lee and Wendy's party, and you invited me to your gracious home and meet all these great people, and this is a real wonderful thing that you do here. So thank you.
Thanks, Jeff.